sure that somewhere you have seen this multicolored jigsaw puzzle ribbon, maybe on the back of a car or on a t-shirt, but do you know all that it means? The mystery and complexity of autism. We know that autism affects the way the brain functions, resulting in difficulties with communication and social interaction, as well as some unusual patterns of behavior, activities, and interests. However, the cause is still a mystery. The disorder is complex. A wide range of individual exists, resulting in no one uniform picture of what autism looks like. The ribbon's colors and shapes represent the diversity of people and families living with autism. Did you know that autism is not related to race, ethnicity, family income, lifestyle, or parenting? Yet, there is a gender correlation, with more males than females being identified with autism. The brightness of the ribbon signals hope through research and awareness, and this is the intent of today's program. I'm Dr. Sharon Shane, and over the course of the next hour, we will focus on understanding the nature of the disorder, as well as identifying supports and resources for individuals with autism and their families. Our program will be broken into 3 segments. I will first interview a parent to get her insights on the topic. Then, LaSalle faculty and students will discuss university programs and resources. Finally, representatives from a community organization will share additional supports related to autism. To begin our program, I have with me Joanne Gomez, a parent of a son with autism. Thank you, Joanne, for sharing with us today and telling us about your journey. Would you tell us about your son, John Paul, and the joys and the successes of raising him, of loving him, of nurturing him?
John Paul is my second son, second child. I noticed around the age of 2 that he wasn't communicating with us or anyone else in the community. I took him to, I might want to say that John Paul's 36 years old, so this was back in 1976 that he was about 2 or 3 years old, and I started taking him to pediatricians to see if they could tell me what was wrong with him. No one could identify it. Our family was transferred to South America. We were living there for 2 years. I took him to a specialist there, and they didn't know what was wrong. And finally, someone suggested that I bring him to the Autistic Center, that perhaps they could tell me what was wrong. So I did. He was diagnosed at first with just severe brain damage because he did not fit all the requirements of autism. At that time, they were very strict. Since then, they see that it is a spectrum of behaviors and abilities. So it wasn't until he was about 10 that he was finally diagnosed as autistic. We arranged for him to attend a private school for autistic children in Bryn Mawr called the Timothy School. That's where it was located at that time. He was there for 4 years. He did very well. He has speech. He can relate to people. He's considered high functioning. So he was there for 4 years, and then we sent him to Devereaux program, which was a more integrated program. But since they didn't have vocational training, after he was there for a few years, I put him in an intermediate unit program that did provide vocational training. He graduated from school when he was 21, and he has ever since has worked at the Timothy School as a teacher's aide in the music program that they have there. So it's been close to 15 years that he's had a job. He works 3 days a week, 15 hours a week, which from what I can tell is a very good time for an autistic person to work, not the 40-hour, 5 days a week. A lot of them don't seem to be able to handle that. John Paul is a delight. Of course, I'm his mother. I would feel that way, but He is very caring of other people. He has a lot of people in his life that truly adore him and include him in many activities.
And Joanne, will you continue along that line of identifying his strengths?
Absolutely. He is very artistic, is very musically inclined. He taught himself to play the piano, played by ear, taught himself to draw. I eventually found people who would work with him in those areas. And of course, being the music aid continues that strength. I was encouraged by a psychiatrist at the Timothy School to concentrate on his strengths at home. He said he's being helped all day long at school. He needs to have a normal home life when he comes home. So that's what we've tried to do, and certainly we've traveled with him. You have to make adjustments to take him to a movie theater. In the evening when it's full of people is a little more than he can handle. So we go, in the afternoon, early afternoon, when often it's just he and I. But you adjust to his needs.
I recall talking with another mother of a child who was high functioning, and she said one of the things that she did was to put his schedule on the computer every morning, because if things changed, he would get upset. And so she thought that was one of the prompts or one of the strategies she would use at home. Do you use such things?
Well, of course, back in 1976, the computer.
No computer.
Wasn't. So what I did was every morning I got up early and I used magnetic letters, and I would write a message on the refrigerator so that when he came down to the kitchen, he would see today is Monday. I would always put the day, and then I would, be in simple language, write what he was going to do that day, so that he would have an idea. They need to know what is going to happen. They cannot anticipate what will happen. So it's important to give them those prompts.
It can be quite an upset, because I do recall having a student teacher in an autistic support classroom, and when the schedule was interrupted by a surprise auditorium program, the child turned and bit the student teacher, and it was just a way of communicating the frustration. And so, I know there are several systems that will help with that, but you came across this yourself, or did someone suggest this to you?
I'm sure that I saw that they did it at Timothy School, that they planned for the children and had the schedule, the daily schedule up, so I thought this would be a good idea to do at home, because on the weekends, he's still autistic. So you want to keep him on schedule and let him know what's going to happen.
I want to get back to his interests. You had talked about music and art. Is there anything where he seems to have a very repetitive interest in something?
Sesame Street.
Yeah.
Has always been very important, and Kermit the Frog, for whatever reason. It used to be that was the only way he would talk to us. He had a puppet, a hand puppet, and Kermit talked to other people, not to us so much. He would talk to us, but people that he didn't know, or maybe family members that just kind of came and went. We always used the puppet, or he did, to talk to them. But Sesame Street is, and we feel that it's because the repetitiveness of Sesame Street, the learning. I mean, that's how he learned his numbers and letters, by watching, because they repeat so often the same thing. That
I'm of the mindset that you use that interest as a vehicle for instruction.
Right.
Because there were two students that I have worked with who had a fixation on trains, which is not uncommon.
No.
And
Yes, a friend that does.
Yeah, and the mothers would tell me about what the rooms looked like at home. And so I started to use train books as a method for teaching math and sequencing and all kinds of skills. So it is a way to, I think, get in there if you have the interest, you use that academically. I also want to return to a point you were making about the Timothy School and then the Devereux School. What did you find to be the common areas of programming for a student who has autism?
Small classes. Teachers who have some knowledge of the autistic population, so that they know, they have some idea of what to expect.
And then at the double-digit ages, you're getting into vocational programming.
Yes.
How about domestic skills? Did you see that?
Well, you know, they were doing that all through his schooling, teaching him activities of daily living.
Right.
I mean, that was always included in the programs, and they also encouraged us as parents to have them do chores at home so that they would learn, you know, now he takes complete care of himself.
Okay.
I mean, even as far as getting his breakfast and lunch, he can do that himself. I'm a little leery about the gas stove, you know, but certainly he can take care of himself because of all that. But you know, it was done in steps, and you can't expect this to happen overnight.
That's right. You also mentioned his caring, and I happen to know in a previous conversation with you that, and you mentioned at the outset of the program, that he is one of two sons. Could you describe a little more of the relationship that John Paul has with his brother, and maybe some things, activities, extracurricular activities that they've engaged in?
We've always included our older son in John Paul's activities, so that he got an idea of, you know, what his brother's strengths were and his weaknesses, and got to know his brother better, because of course there was not this, you know, one-on-one type of sibling relationship. It just wasn't possible. But my older son is also a very caring person, and he was very interested in Boy Scouts, and he came to me one day and said, do you think John Paul could join our Boy Scout group? And I said, oh, gee, you know, that'd be wonderful, but I don't want to take away your time. I know how much you like it. He said, no, I think he'd really like it. Well, he did. He took John Paul into the group, and John Paul became an Eagle Scout along with his brother, which is quite an accomplishment. And because of that, the teacher at his school saw that John Paul was doing this, and they organized a Boy Scout troop at the school for the other autistic kids, and several of them became Eagle Scouts also. So it was a very worthwhile program. But his brother has always been sort of protective of him, but includes him. He was in his wedding, you know, sang a song at his wedding, and has always, and has, you know, told us that, you know, when we're not here anymore, my husband and I, that he is going to take care of his brother. His brother is going to live with him. So.
Quite dedicated.
Yeah.
Could you tell us more about John Paul's other interactions outside of the family, friends, school friends?
It's very difficult for an autistic person to develop relationships. The socializing is one of their weaknesses. So another parent and I decided, when our kids were teenagers, the elementary camps, you know, were no longer available to them, and there wasn't anything available. So she and I decided to start our own camp for autistic adolescents, which we did. And we ran it for about 8 years until the kids were out. And after the camp was over, we then developed a social program so that the children would get together, because these are the relationships they developed. They're so comfortable with each other because they've known each other so long. They know what to expect from each other. So that's what we did. But it's an effort. You know, you have to, you know, do this on your own, really, to get them together, and we've done it. We've kept it going, so they really enjoy getting together. Now, you know, they don't call each other at night, or, you know, or hang out with each other on the weekends, you know, but at least, you know, we can get them together.
Okay.
frequently.
Quite a bit of dedication on your part. Yeah.
Well, it's my son.
You do what you do. I
That's
know.
right.
Tell us what your goals are for him, for the future, your concerns for the future.
Well, as any parent, I want him to be happy, and I want him to enjoy life as much as possible. So, that's why I'm very grateful that he's got this job, because he really enjoys what he does. In the summertime, he volunteers there's a camp at the Timothy School, and he volunteers for 6 weeks. He runs the music program.
Nice.
He enjoys interacting with. We have a very large extended family, so and I realize that he probably will live with his brother. I'm hoping to make it as easy as possible by continuing to help him develop skills that will, make his life a little easier.
Joanne, this has changed your life in very positive ways. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I used to be a very shy, retiring type of person, but when you have a child like this, you can't be that way. You have to fight for his rights, especially, when we were doing it. Nowadays, it's wonderful that there are so many programs for the kids. But back in 1976, we had to fight for everything, and it just changed me as a person, and I'm very grateful for that.
I'm grateful to you for joining us today. Thank you so much, Joanne.
Thank you.
Quite a devoted woman to her family. Stress levels are high in any family. Families affected by autism can be easily overwhelmed by compounding factors. They want to educate themselves and find essential services and treatments. They have to cope with additional emotional and financial issues and negotiate relationships among family members. When we return, we'll look at LaSalle's response to some of these pressing issues.
It must be love. It must be hospice.
I just really think you should go by yourself next time.
I can't leave you here alone by yourself.
I was alone there. What difference does it make?
If a chronic illness is driving you apart, call 1-800-344-4867 because a healthy relationship matters.
Here's a 3-bedroom by the park.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll need a 3-bedroom when we have kids.
Will we have kids? Like, I thought we were still deciding whether to have kids.
Well, it'll be a lot harder if we wait.
Kids are expensive. Your medication costs $1,000 a month.
Well, my insurance covers it.
As long as you're working.
Well, that's only if I get worse.
When you get worse.
Relationships can be challenging, especially when one of you has a chronic illness.
Maybe this was a mistake.
If a chronic illness is driving you apart, call 1-800-344-4867 because a healthy relationship matters.
Welcome back. We're discussing autism, how it affects families, and what those families can do. We're now going to look at LaSalle University's initiatives to expand understanding, treatment, and support for individuals and families affected by autism. From LaSalle, we have Dr. Bonnie Zedek, Director of Programs and Social Work, Kate Luciano and Kelly Lazarowski, seniors in the undergraduate education program, Dr. Carol Petrallo, Assistant Professor of Education, and Mr. Steve Downs, Director of our graduate education programs. Welcome and thank you for participating in today's program. I wanted to pose a few questions to each of you before we get into some general discussions. So, Bonnie, what do you see as the role of the social worker in supporting families affected by autism?
Well, Sharon, at LaSalle University, we're preparing undergraduate social workers for a variety of support roles with all families, including families who have children with special needs and individuals with autism. The first thing that the social worker will be involved in is community resources. The social worker will know the difference between supplemental security income and social security. The social worker will be able to help the family through all the acronyms and to ensure that the family is taking advantage of all the services that are out there. The second thing is that the social worker will know other families. The support of other families has been so crucial to all families of children with special needs. I used to work for the Association for Retarded Citizens before I came to LaSalle, and they certainly are a model for bringing together parents and offering peer support, parent support. And then the social worker is going to empower and work with the families in an advocacy role. There are never enough services, and the parents have traditionally been the population that has gone after services that these individuals need. And the social worker can support that effort through legislative advocacy, supporting the parents as they visit their legislators, going to Harrisburg, going to Washington, D.C., and always fighting, always advocating for more and better and high quality services.
Okay, could you tell us a little more about some recent developments coming out of Harrisburg?
Yes, Pennsylvania has just enacted a Medicaid waiver for people with autism and autism spectrum disorders. The Medicaid waiver has been around since 1981, really an initiative of the Reagan administration. But now we see it being extended finally to families who have children and adults with autism. And this will enable individuals to stay in their own homes. The primary role of the Medicaid waiver is to remain in your community, as opposed to the long ago tradition of sending people to state institutions. There aren't any state institutions anymore that will be accepting individuals. They'll be in their own communities. They'll be in their own homes. They'll be in group homes or community living arrangements with the needs, all the services that they need on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week basis. The Medicaid waiver supports individuals in the community rather than requiring them to enter state institutions, which of course is more costly and less desirable. So this is a wonderful development, and the family will be able to shape the plan that they feel will best serve their individual. The Medicaid waiver is certainly the latest of a number of service initiatives for this population.
Well, you've got some convincing information there, Bonnie, about the role of the social worker. Thank you so much. Kate, tell us a little bit about your student teaching placement right now, and then let's get into a discussion about some of the difficulties that might be encountered with this population.
Okay, I'm currently student teaching in a middle school aged at Bankbridge Development Center in Jersey, and my students are severely autistic. I have about 10 students in my class, and there's a wide range of behaviors in my specific class. As you know, no two students are the same. There's definitely difficulties with social and communication skills There's little to no communication between students in my class, and as far as adult to student communication is very little as well. Any type of socialization usually needs prompting from an adult, and most of my kids are nonverbal. We have some are verbal, some are nonverbal, but there's little to no eye contact between you and that student. They're usually, it seems as if they're oblivious to what is going on around them. So that's definitely a problem when they're interacting with peers or adults in our setting. I also, with my specific students, there's a lot of repetitive behaviors, and you mentioned earlier with restricted interests. I have one student who, as you mentioned, is very interested in trains, and anything he does has to do with trains. If he's working on some type of academic work, he'll line things up and move them around the desk as if it looks like a train. If he has leisure time, he'll go to the computer and he'll look up videos singing, "I've been working on the railroad," anything that has to do with the trains. And we found when working with him specifically in his math work, I made a number line that looked like a train, and that kept his attention much more than the regular number line. I also have a student who's very interested in Dora the Explorer, and again, we do what we can to accommodate that interest. As far as repetitive behaviors, there's many self-stimulatory behaviors that go on in our classroom. I have a student who jumps out of his seat quite often. I have a student who's obsessed with our schedule, and every day and any time of the day, he'll get out of his seat and go over to the schedule and touch it as he goes down to make sure we're in order. If something is not in order, he'll go point to it, and he knows, like you had mentioned earlier, he's uncomfortable with what is happening. It's not what he's used to. I have a student who cascades with any kind of puzzle piece. He'll put them in front of his face and let them drop. Whether it's puzzle pieces, he's done it with food, anything that he can watch fall in front of his face. He does that quite often at any time during the day that he has the opportunity to.
Now, what do you do to facilitate communication? Any strategies that seem to be working right now to increase that?
Well, within our school and my classroom, we use the PECS communication system. So the students, a lot of them have their PECS books anywhere we go. So if they have something, if they are nonverbal, they'll be able to communicate a sentence through that with their pictures, and it has the words underneath all of the pictures. I also have one student who is completely nonverbal, and he uses a talking system, a talking device. So if there's something that he needs or wants, he'll take out his device and he presses the correct buttons, and he's able to communicate with you that way. Some of my students are verbal, but just need the prompting, like I said. So you might just need to have them focus, stand right in front of them, maybe hold their hands, or make sure they're looking at you, and you ask them what they want or what they need, and they are able to communicate verbally.
Okay, now Kelly, you've had a different experience in your student teaching on Australia, where you were working with a student who is Asperger's and higher functioning. So could you tell us a little bit about that, because we are looking at a spectrum of disorders.
Sure. The student that I was working with was in an inclusion classroom with, he was a 7th grader, and the classroom was 15 students from the 3rd grade to 8th grade. And in this school, their policy was happy children learn. And so they let the students decide a lot of what goes on. And there's a policy that if you didn't want to participate in a lesson, you were allowed to remove yourself and either go to the library or walk around the grounds outside. And when I got to my placement, I would say the student was out of the classroom probably 90 to 95% of the time. And so one of my main goals while being there was to get him re-engaged in the classroom as much as possible. And what was happening was every day school started with a community meeting. And we found that it was just really overwhelming for him to start the day with that high social interaction. So first we set up that he was allowed, that 15 minutes at the beginning of the day to go outside. And then we tried to transition him back inside the classroom. Another key element to his transition back in the classroom was using his interests in the curriculum with the rest of the students. He was very, he loved nature, he loved outdoors, animals, so for a few classes a day we would take the whole class outside and we would do the lesson outside because we had the luxury of being in Australia and it being nice. So that, he was walking around and, kind of made his way to the classroom for a little bit. And then other things we did scavenger hunts, he loved that, and so it was a slow transition of maybe 1 lesson a day. The next day was 2, getting him back in the classroom, and really just trying to find his interests in having the whole class become a part of it.
Right. Now, Kelly, would you say that some of your skills were developed in the summer practicum where you worked with Carol Petrello?
Yes, when I worked at the summer practicum, it was a great experience of working alongside graduate students as well as supervisors who are experienced in the field and working together to come up with strategies and approaches, because I think one of the biggest things I've learned is it's not about recreating the wheel. It's about learning from each other, people's past experiences. And so at practicum, that was just a great time to bounce ideas off each other and really work with a huge range of students with different abilities, high functioning, low functioning, high cognitive, low cognitive. It was a great experience.
So, Carol, will you tell us a little more about this summer practicum experience that you offer our students?
I've been involved for the last 14 years. And when we first started, it's in the Wraparound School District. And we had 12 students the first year. And we were all in the cafeteria. And they were from ages 5 to 12 with an array of exceptionalities. And that was quite a challenge for the graduate students. Year by year, we picked up classroom after classroom after classroom until we have 10 classrooms. And then we stopped at 5th grade, 12 years old, that's about right. Well, the children got older, and as the children got older, the parents said, well, what are we going to do now? So I piloted the middle school, then I piloted the high school, and then parents came, oh, do we have to be kindergarten? No, then we piloted the preschool. So now we take children in, special needs and typical, from the age of 4 through the age, my oldest this summer is going to be about 19 years old. And we will do that until the age of 21. It is a graduate program on the master's degree in our department for elementary and special ed certification.
Now, Carol, you also give some attention to the family.
Yeah,
could you talk about that a little?
I want to share that. I want to share that. And I brought with me today a letter from a parent. Every summer at the end, the parents want to share back. And they say, you know, they'll say thank you to us. But then they say, can we thank the university? And so I said yes, and so they share their letters. The parent that I'm going to read the letter from today is a parent. We have to kick off Family Fun Night. And that, it is fun night for the children. It's work for the graduate students, because it's all fun activities for the children, but the graduate students are assessing because of the units that have to be planned and the lesson plan, and as you know, the accommodations on a daily basis. So I'm walking around classroom to classroom, just peeking in, and this mother is standing outside, the door is closed, and she's crying. And as the director, I come by, and why is she upset? And she goes, no, 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 they're tears of joy. You see my son there? This is the first time he's ever been with typical children. Never before. And so this is the letter that she writes one every single summer. She has stressed the importance that the children call it camp. We're an inclusion program, but they call it the camp. And we have all 3 of her children. Her oldest is on the spectrum, and he was nonverbal when he came to us. And we have his typical sisters. I just want to share a short portion of this because this is coming from the parent. It's coming from the parent. This past summer was the 5th year my children have attended the camp, as they started when they were 5 years old. I have a son with autism and 2 daughters who all enjoy the camp. And then she starts breaking it down. I describe this camp as everybody wins. Perhaps the most obvious win is for the children with special needs who have typical peers who serve as role models. And we all know the importance of including these children whenever possible. The ratio of students to teachers allows for one-on-one attention when needed and time to work on specific IEP goals. Additionally, the typical children who attend the camp most likely have a sibling with a special need. So the typical kids come into camp with exposure to a person, you know, who may be different from them and need a little bit of extra caring and patience. So even if siblings are in different classrooms, as is the case with my children, the typical children meet new friends from day one, and they understand who may need extra help and are ready, willing, and able to be a helper without being with any judgment. In other words, they get it. And the typical kids are also the winners in this camp, as they on a daily basis are learning compassion, helpfulness, caring, understanding, and patience.
Carol, I'm going to have to interrupt at this moment. We only have a few minutes left, and that program is so important. I know you and Steve have developed a concentration program of 12 credits. So can I ask you, Steve, to discuss that?
Sure. Just briefly, Sharon, building off of this rich experience that we have in the practicum setting, we wanted to figure out how we could take that and extend that out into the educational community further. Dr. Yost, Dr. Petrillo in particular, were leading the charge on developing a curriculum that would capture a lot of this experience and provide it to educators in the region who could be a part of our master's program or just take graduate studies. It's 4 courses. It starts with a look at the various presentations that our clients, our children may give us in terms of being on the spectrum. And also it looks at basically a continuum of interventions to give us a baseline. The second course follows on with a communications unit where we look at the special communications needs that we know these children have and help tune educators into how to better service those children in their classrooms. I came out of an inclusion classroom. The things that we have in this program are the very things that we needed to learn sooner rather than later to serve these children. The third course really is I think, a breakthrough opportunity because it combines the muscle groups, if you will, of the university, drawing on our social work colleagues, our psychology group, speech pathology, and family counseling, along with education, to give a real, what we call a systemic approach to supporting the child and family.
That's a
with
real
autism.
need.
And then we close it
have a
out
fourth.
with a real experience implementing the IEP for all children in the classroom, and the educators actually take the skills that they've developed and apply these in their real world setting. We're very proud of it.
Another exciting program. I want to thank you all for joining us today and sharing the programs that we have at LaSalle. Clearly, LaSalle is demonstrating its commitment to understanding and supporting individuals and families affected by autism. When we return, representatives from Greentree Partnerships will share their resources and networking to benefit educators and families affected by autism.
You know that I'm late.
I know what time it is.
But I told them I would be there by 10 o'clock.
I know.
Look, if I'm putting you out, I won't volunteer anymore.
Forget it.
Song I'm sure you'll all remember. Relationships can be challenging, especially when one of you has a chronic illness.
Baby, we can't go on like this.
If a chronic illness is driving you apart, call 1-800-344-4867 because a healthy relationship matters.
just really think you should go by yourself next time.
I can't leave you here alone by yourself.
I was alone there. What difference does it make?
Relationships can be challenging, especially when one of you has a chronic illness.
It seems so long ago.
If a chronic illness is driving you apart, call 1-800-344-4860 because a healthy relationship matters.
We're back and continuing our discussion of autism. For this final segment, we'll be examining one way that LaSalle has connected to external partners to extend the understanding of autism. From Greentree Partnerships, Dr. Tom Lattis, Dr. Eric Mitchell, and Ms. Zanetta Moore-Driggers will be joining us. Let me start with you, Tom, to ask for some explanation of Greentree Partnerships, the kind of resources that you offer, and the kind of networking that's provided.
Okay. Greentree School is in Germantown, and it's a special needs school for children with autism and other special needs. And one of the divisions of Greentree School is Greentree Partnerships. And Greentree Partnerships provides outreach. We do training, professional development for teachers and for people working in after-school programs, residential programs. We offer conferences like the conference with LaSalle on autism. The other thing we do is consultation. So schools or other agencies might call us in and say, help, help. Right. We have a particular child who we're trying to figure out. And then we also do ongoing consultation in schools. There's a charter school in Philadelphia with a lot of kids on the spectrum where we do a considerable amount of consultation.
Now, Tom, do you just work in the city or do you extend out from that?
No, we work in the greater Philadelphia area.
Okay, all right. And how would people access you?
Well, they can go to our website, which is probably the best way. It's www.gtpartnerships.org.
Right, okay. Thank you so much. Now, Eric, tell us about your role there and then your experiences with children with autism, and you can focus in on the strengths of these children.
Sure. I wear several hats at Greentree. One of the initiatives that we have is what we call a Wraparound Program, which provides intensive services to children on the autistic spectrum. We specialize only with children on the autistic spectrum. And in this program affords the children usually access to a one-to-one professional who's been specially trained through a 40 or so hour autism training program on a yearly basis, and supervised by a behavior specialist with specific experience on the autistic spectrum, working with families and individuals. I also oversee some of the services across the rest of the school as well. The autism classrooms and the Asperger's classrooms that are there, as well as some consultation with the early intervention program, which has a significant population of autistic students as well. We are very active in promoting development of the current services that we offer, as well as branching out and looking at new avenues in providing services for children and families across this region affected by autism. When families are first met with the news that their child may have some developmental delays, often culminating in a diagnosis of autism, we call that the autism bomb. That really blows a family. Really blows a family apart in a figurative sense. that their dreams and aspirations of what they once held for their child are not what they once were. That creates a type of a grieving process, if you will, and until that process is resolved, it's very difficult to see the strengths, the positive aspects of what it means to be on the autistic spectrum. But at the other side of that process has a great deal of hope for holds a great deal of hope for families, and in those on the spectrum themselves. One of the things that we do is in our vocational training is we try to emphasize what the strengths might be. If most people are familiar with the movie Rain Man, you know, a kind of stereotypical image of what a strength might be. And although this is an extreme example, you know, stereotypes are born out of truth to some extent, and each individual on the spectrum brings to the table a set of unique gifts that they can offer. The question is, can we be sensitive enough to parse out those gifts and to develop them into functional fixations that really work for that individual, and will create a sense of purpose and meaningful direction in their lives, for a sense of happiness and fulfillment. And what more can we ask for our children?
Right.
Really.
So you provide a lot of services for the entire family then?
Yes.
So when the parents are going through this phase of the autism bomb, you are right there by their sides providing psychological counseling?
Absolutely. Okay. Our mobile therapists, as well as our outpatient therapy department, provides some great expertise and resources for families as they're going through the process. Families are able to reach out whenever they need that support. Not just during regular business hours, but after school, weekends, and so on, when they're being hit the hardest in their daily lives.
Okay. And Zanetta, would you tell us, thank you so much, Ara. Zanetta, will you tell us your connection with Greentree, and then the advocacy that you're involved in right now, how you got there?
Okay. I'm involved with Greentree because they provide behavioral support services to my son, who's on the spectrum. I've been involved with Greentree now for about 5 years. They've been a tremendous asset to our family. We have had the same team of people working with us for the entire time. My son has had the same TSS worker, one-to-one, for the entire time we've been with Greentree. So it's been a great comfort to us to have that continuity and someone that my son has become accustomed to and knows very well. So we have had a very great experience with Greentree, and we're very fortunate because unfortunately not all agencies can provide that same level of service and that same continuity. So we've been very pleased with how things are going. And with respect to my advocacy role, I've come to understand that families often are not aware of what their rights are for their children, particularly with respect to the educational services that they are entitled to receive. So I'm an attorney. I've been practicing law for 15 years almost, and I recently decided to make my practice a very strong focus on educational advocacy, helping parents in that process with working with schools, and hopefully in a very collaborative way with the schools so that things don't escalate into contention. So helping families to understand what their rights are, what they are allowed to request from schools, what they can expect, and helping them to figure out that process and help the children to get what they need in school.
Okay. Not a brand new, but a relatively new law was passed with the Gaskin case. Could you tell us a little bit about that and maybe the implications for your advocacy with families affected by autism?
Oh, well, Gaskin came out of a situation where parents were dissatisfied with how the services to their special needs children were being provided in this Philadelphia school district. And, excuse me, and there was a settlement of the case. Actually, it was the Pennsylvania Department of Education who was a defendant. There was a settlement of the case, and out of that, there are monitoring programs whereby a panel was set up to make sure, to go around to the various school districts to make sure that they're implementing the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act properly, and including special needs students in the general curriculum to the extent possible. That was one of the main focuses of the grievance that parents had. Special education students should be included to the fullest extent that they are, that's possible. Again, as some of the other panelists discussed, peer models for behavior, peer models for developing relationships, for developing skills is very important. And so the panel monitors school districts to make sure that the special needs students are being given that opportunity as they are entitled to.
Okay. We've talked over the time here with the various panelists about different settings, the inclusive setting and the segregated setting. Do you want to discuss the pros and cons of these as you see them?
Well, I can take one stab at that, and I think that as a result of as Zanina was saying with Gaskins, there is a specific movement now toward inclusion of autistic students in the regular education curriculum as much as possible. Many times that has great benefits, not only for the autistic individual, but also for what we refer to as the neurotypical students in that classroom, who develop a sense of empathy and understanding and the appreciation of difference that they may not otherwise be able to experience. We've seen this taking place in some of the consultation that we've done with Greentree Partnerships, which Tom can speak to. At the same time, there are some students who are not as responsive to being in a regular education setting with whatever level of accommodation that's made. And that's where places like Greentree schools step in and provide that specialized setting for those students so that they can still progress and develop and recoup those delays from early on.
One thing that you often hear said is children on the spectrum, particularly I would say children with Asperger's, just say that if you've met one child with Asperger's, you've met one child with Asperger's. It's very, very hard to generalize. And to know whether or not a fully inclusive general education placement or a totally separate special ed placement is the right one. Just by looking at the profile of a child isn't enough. You need to know the setting, what the parents' wishes are, what the skills of the educators are. It's got to be done on an individual basis. But when it can be done on a general education basis, I think Eric's point is well taken, that it helps everybody, particularly the kids who may never encounter a person with autism otherwise.
Yeah. Zanetta, may I return to you to talk about the services that perhaps you had to struggle for, the services that are provided for you now and for the family that would be most beneficial?
Well, I have to say that since we were connected to Greentree School early on in the process, we did not have to struggle for a lot of services. The team there was, as I said, really great with respect to working with us and providing us with what we needed. Again, I know other parents who did not have the same experience, and I think that one of the biggest challenges that I've heard most often people have a difficult time receiving is the one-to-one services that an agency like Greentree can provide. And that is a person who accompanies a student sometimes for a short period of the day, sometimes for the entire day, to keep them on task, to give them maybe the prodding or the prompts that they need to attend to their academic work. And that is, I would say, one of the biggest services that people have a really hard time having access to.
Okay. Any advice for parents, Zanetta, along this process, particularly with the identification of a child? When did you start to suspect that your child may have autism? What things to look for?
Well, I actually did not suspect myself. My son had recurring ear infections from about the age of 18 months until about 2 years old. And it was not until he went to an evaluation for his hearing that the person who was evaluating him at that point mentioned that he was not engaging with them at the level that they were expecting for his age, and suggested another evaluation. And at first we were just given a diagnosis of some general developmental delays, and he was given speech therapy and some occupational therapy. It wasn't until about 2 years later that we received the diagnosis of autism, autistic spectrum disorder.
Okay.
So one of the things that may have been a red flag was the fact that his communication was not up to speed with a typical child at his age level. But he's an only child. He's the only child that we've had, and so we didn't really know exactly what else we should be looking for. But that was a big indicator, and as well as his interaction with other people. With us, he was very affectionate. He was interactive. He let us know what he needed. But with other people, he was a little bit different, and that was something that was a clue. And that's something that preschool teachers or daycare teachers can be aware of and keep an eye out for parents.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We have gotten such valuable information. I want to thank all the participants for sharing their experiences and expertise regarding autism. We hope you now have a greater understanding of this symbol and autism. God bless. On May 1st, 2009, Greentree Partnerships and LaSalle University will offer the 3rd Annual Autism Conference, focusing on perspectives on transitions. The conference will be held in the Student Union building of LaSalle's main campus in Northwest Philadelphia. For registration details, please log on to www.gt, that would be Greentree, gtpartnerships.org.